The desert sun was merciless, baking the earth and everything on it, when Grace's battered old pickup coughed, sputtered, and finally gave up the ghost. Steam hissed from beneath the hood as she pulled to the side of the dusty track that stretched endlessly into the hills. With no phone signal and the nearest ranch a good 10 miles west, she braced herself for a long, silent wait. What she didn't expect was the slow, deliberate sound of hooves. She turned, squinting through the haze, and there he was, a stranger on horseback, straight out of another time. Broad-shouldered, dust-covered, and wearing a weathered Stetson, he offered her a lopsided smile and said, "You look like you could use a miracle, or a mechanic." Grace, fiercely independent and used to solving her own problems, wasn't one to trust easily. But something in the man's voice, steady, calm, without the usual arrogance, made her pause. He introduced himself simply as Jack. No surname, no story, just Jack. He checked her engine with quiet confidence, confirming what she already suspected. The radiator was shot. When she offered him a warm meal in exchange for help getting back to her family ranch, he didn't hesitate. What began as a practical agreement slowly grew into something more. Back at the Silvertree Ranch, Jack blended into Grace's world with startling ease. He fixed broken gates, soothed nervous horses, and never demanded anything in return. But behind his steady hands and watchful eyes, Grace sensed there was more to him than he let on. He didn't speak of his past, avoided questions about where he'd come from, and never said how long he planned to stay. Still, there was something in the way he looked at the land, in the way he listened when no one else did, that began to pull at her guarded heart. One night, when thieves broke into the barn, Grace watched in awe as Jack fought them off with effortless skill, not like a ranch hand defending his paycheck, but like a man who had spent years fighting for things far more dangerous. She realized then that Jack wasn't just a drifter. He was someone with a past, someone trained, someone powerful, and someone running from something bigger than she could imagine. She didn't know yet that Jack was actually Jackson W. Langford, once a billionaire landowner who had walked away from everything after a tragic loss. And yet, here he was, sleeping in her bunkhouse, mending fences by day and guarding her land by night. Grace didn't know what scared her more, the truth she hadn't uncovered, or the fact that, despite everything, she was starting to trust him. The next morning, Grace found herself standing on the porch, a cup of tea warming her hands as she watched Jack move with quiet purpose across the yard. He was already up before sunrise, repairing the old barn door that had been split during the break-in the night before. There was a rhythm to the way he worked, focused, precise, like each movement held weight. She had seen hired hands before, men who groaned at the sight of a broken gate or cursed when horses kicked up mud. But Jack, he never complained, never rushed. He simply got on with it. And the more Grace watched, the more her curiosity grew. Who was this man who moved like a soldier but looked like a cowboy? Why did he carry himself with such restraint, as though he was holding back more than just his past? She approached him just as he drove the final nail into the repaired gate. "Thanks," she said softly, "for last night." Jack looked at her, brow damp with sweat, and gave a quiet nod. "No need." Grace hesitated, then asked, "You ever learn to fight like that in a bar?" His answer was a half smile and a shrug. "Not exactly." "You're trained," she pressed. "That wasn't luck. That was precision." Jack wiped his hands on a rag and glanced toward the hills before replying, "Some things don't leave you." The way he said it stopped her from digging further. His tone was neither boastful nor evasive. It was laced with something deeper. Grief, maybe, or regret. As the day wore on, Jack continued to help without being asked. He reinforced the chicken coop, checked the perimeter fence, and even managed to calm Dusty, Grace's most unpredictable mare, with nothing more than a whistle and a steady hand. Grace couldn't look away. Every time she caught him in a moment of stillness, she saw a flicker of something behind his eyes, a past life, a different man, and it both unsettled and intrigued her. That evening, as the sky burned orange and pink, they sat side by side on the porch steps, silence stretching between them like an old friend. Grace broke it first. "My father used to say land's only as good as the man willing to stay and work it." Jack nodded, eyes on the horizon. "Land remembers the hands that build it and the feet that run from it." She turned her head slightly. "And which are you?" He met her gaze, and for a moment he let his guard slip. "I used to build, then I ran, still figuring out which one wins in the end." Their eyes held each other for a long moment. No more words needed. Something had shifted. Something real. And when Grace asked if he ever thought about staying, Jack didn't dismiss it. He didn't offer an excuse. He simply asked, "Would it matter if I did?" That was the moment Grace realized this wasn't just about a man passing through. It was about what he might be running toward, and what she might be willing to let in. They didn't speak of love, not yet. But something had taken root. Quietly, steadily, like everything Jack did. And though neither of them knew what would come next, the silence between them no longer felt empty. It felt like a beginning. The peace that had begun to settle over Silver Tree Ranch was shattered before dawn. Grace had barely drifted into sleep when a violent crash rang out across the yard, jarring her awake with a start. Horses screamed in panic, their whinnies high and terrified. Without hesitation, she grabbed the rifle by the front door, shoved on her boots, and sprinted toward the barn. What she saw made her heart stop. 3 shadowed figures were moving quickly, too quickly. One already inside the barn, while another had torn a door half off its hinges. And then, through the chaos, she saw him, Jack, moving like lightning. It wasn't just that he reacted, it was how he moved, controlled, lethal, and eerily silent. He caught one of the intruders by the collar and slammed him against a post before the man could even register what was happening. Another man charged him with a crowbar, but Jack sidestepped with military precision, delivered a punch to the ribs, and swept his legs out in one smooth motion. The third took one look at the scene and ran. Grace, still breathless, approached just as Jack was checking the horses, his hands gentle even after the violence. "You all right?" she asked, her voice shaking. Jack looked at her, nodding toward the groaning men on the ground. Better question for them. It was then that Grace realized, whatever life Jack had lived before, it wasn't on a ranch. The control, the efficiency, the clarity of thought under pressure, it all pointed to training far beyond anything a cowboy would need. Still, he didn't explain, and she didn't press. Not yet. By sunrise, Jack had already repaired the damaged stall doors and was reinforcing the locks with calm determination. Grace sat on the porch steps, paperwork forgotten in her lap, watching him work. There was no fear in the way he moved, only purpose. When she finally approached him, he greeted her with a nod before going back to hammering in a support beam. "Thank you," she said again, this time more firmly. He paused, wiped his brow, and looked out toward the pasture. "You get much trouble out here?" "Sometimes," she replied. "Land like this attracts people who want to take what they didn't earn." He didn't say anything. Instead, he walked to the water trough and splashed his face, his silence heavy. Grace followed him, folding her arms. "Where did you learn to move like that?" Jack hesitated. "Let's just say I've had to protect things before." "That's not an answer." "No," he admitted, drying his face with a rag. "But it's the truth." She stepped closer, eyes narrowing. "You know, it's hard to trust someone who won't tell me a damn thing about himself." He met her gaze without flinching. "You trusted me enough to let me stay. That was before you broke someone's ribs like it was second nature." Jack exhaled, the faintest smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "I told you, I'm just Jack." "Well, Jack," she said sharply, "you're either running from something, hiding something, or both. So which is it?" For a long moment he said nothing, just stared out across the land, the horses grazing quietly as the wind rustled through the tall grass. Then, in a voice so soft it barely reached her ears, he said, "Sometimes people lose things they can't get back, and they don't want to talk about them." Grace's jaw tightened, but something in his voice, some deep hidden fracture, gave her pause. She nodded, just once. "Well, you've earned a few more nights, that's all I'm saying." "That's all I need," Jack replied. And from that moment, things began to shift. Jack rose earlier than ever, before the sun even crested the hills, and threw himself into work with quiet, relentless focus. He fixed the roof on the storage shed, reinforced sagging fence lines, and even managed to break through to Dusty, the mare no one could handle. Grace watched him work, trying to unravel the man who moved like a soldier but chose to live like a ranch hand. She'd ask him questions, light ones at first, about where he grew up or whether he'd worked horses professionally. But his answers were always the same, brief, deflective, and just vague enough to keep her wondering. One evening, after a long day patching fences and mending tack, they found themselves on the porch again. The amber sky was fading into twilight, and the land stretched out in soft, hushed beauty. Grace, unable to hold back anymore, turned to him. "My father used to say land's only as good as the man willing to stay and work it." Jack's reply was quiet but firm. "Land remembers the hands that build it, and the feet that run from it." She studied him. "And which one are you?" His eyes, usually guarded, met hers with something deeper, something vulnerable. "I used to build," he said. "Then I ran. I'm still figuring out which one wins in the end." For the first time since he'd appeared at her broken-down truck, Grace felt like she wasn't speaking to a stranger anymore. He was still a mystery, yes, but no longer just a drifter cowboy. He was a man carrying a heavy past, choosing each day to fight for something again, maybe even for her. It was barely past midnight when the silence of Silvertree Ranch shattered again. This time, it wasn't coyotes or the wind rustling the dry grass. It was metal clanging hard against the barn, the sound of chains rattling and horses panicking. Grace was already out of bed before her mind fully registered the danger. She didn't stop to think. She just grabbed her rifle, slipped on her boots, and sprinted into the night. The scene that met her under the cold blue light of the moon was chaos. Two men in black hoodies working fast to unchain the stall doors. But before she could shout or raise her weapon, Jack emerged from the side stall like a shadow unleashed. What happened next didn't resemble a fight. It was more like a dismantling. Jack tackled the first intruder into the ground with frightening speed, locking his arm around the man's throat in a hold that rendered him unconscious within seconds. The second thug raised a crowbar and swung wildly, but Jack ducked, stepped in, and twisted the man's wrist until the weapon clattered to the floor. 2 precise punches later, the second man was out cold as well. Grace arrived breathless, heart hammering in her chest, rifle raised but not needed. "You all right?" she gasped. Jack, breathing hard but steady, nodded. They weren't professionals, just hired hands. He knelt beside one of the men, quickly checking his pockets and pulling out a folded scrap of paper. It was a crudely drawn map of the ranch, with one of the horse stalls marked in red. Grace felt her blood turn to ice. "They were going after Dusty," she whispered. "She's one of our most valuable mares. Losing her, it would have ruined the ranch's reputation." Jack stood slowly, eyes narrowing. "This isn't just scare tactics anymore. He's trying to dismantle you piece by piece." Grace didn't respond right away. Her throat was tight, her fingers clenched around the rifle. Then, in a small, almost broken voice, she said, "I can't do this alone." "You're not," Jack replied without hesitation. The next morning, Grace found him tightening the perimeter fence with fresh barbed wire. She brought him coffee and stood there silent for a moment, watching him work. "You didn't even hesitate last night," she finally said. "Didn't need to." She hesitated, studying him closely. "You've done this before." He didn't answer right away, but the weight of his silence was enough. She knew now what she hadn't wanted to admit. Jack had once lived a life full of danger, precision, and duty. A life he'd run from, but that never really left him. "Why do you hide it?" she asked gently. "Because the last time I fought for something," he said quietly, "I lost more than I gained." She swallowed hard. "And this time?" He looked at her then, truly looked, still figuring that out. Later that day, Grace was searching through the old loft above the tack room when she stumbled across a dusty, rusted metal box. Inside, among yellowed papers and brittle envelopes, was a name she hadn't expected to see: Jackson W. Langford. The elegant handwriting matched documents bearing signatures and deeds, legal papers, trusts, and titles. One of the largest landowners and silent oil tycoons in the region, a man who had vanished from public life after his fiancée died in a plane crash. The man who had walked away from billions and built an empire in silence. Jack wasn't just a drifter, he was that man. Grace's hands trembled as she drove into town, heart pounding, thoughts spinning. When she returned, she found Jack brushing down one of the colts. He looked up as she approached, and without her saying a word, said softly, "You found it." "You lied to me," she said, her voice breaking. "I didn't lie, I just didn't tell you. You let me believe you were nobody, just some wandering cowboy with calloused hands and a quiet past." "I never asked you to believe anything," he said, not unkindly. "But you knew I did," she whispered. "Yes." Grace paced in a blur of betrayal and disbelief. "You're Jackson Langford, the man who disappeared, the man who let the world think he was gone." "I wanted to be gone," he said. "I built something I thought mattered, and when it all fell apart, I didn't know who I was anymore." She looked at him, eyes filled with tears. "I don't care about your money. I cared about who I thought you were, and now I don't know who that is." Jack's voice was barely above a whisper. "I'm still him, just trying to remember how to live again." But she couldn't face it. Not yet. She walked away in silence, leaving him standing in the dust, with nothing in his hands but regret. And somewhere inside, despite everything she knew about him, Grace realized something far deeper than betrayal. She had started to love him. And that, more than anything, was what terrified her most. The morning after Grace walked away, Silvertree Ranch felt hollow. The sun rose the same as always, casting golden light across the fields, but to Jack everything felt dimmer, quieter, like something essential had left with her. He didn't sleep. Instead, he sat on the porch until dawn, her words echoing in his head. "I don't know who you are anymore." He hadn't meant to deceive her. In truth, he hadn't meant to feel anything at all. He just wanted to disappear into a place where the weight of who he'd been didn't follow him. But Grace had seen through the quiet. She'd seen the man beneath the silence. And now she was gone. She hadn't left a note. Just packed a single duffel and taken her spare truck into town. Jack didn't try to stop her. He knew better than to chase someone running from pain. Instead, he poured his energy into work. Repaired the paddock gate, replaced the window in the feed shed, mended things that didn't need mending just to keep his hands busy. The horses sensed it too, the tension, the shift. Dusty nickered softly whenever he passed her stall, nudging the gate like she wanted to ask where Grace had gone. Meanwhile, Grace wandered aimlessly through the small town she used to avoid. She checked into a roadside inn, the kind with faded curtains and humming radiators. She didn't turn on the telly, just sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the box of papers she'd taken from the loft. The name Jackson W. Langford stared back at her from every document. It was impossible to ignore now. The land deals, the oil shares, the wealth. He hadn't just been someone. He had been everyone once, and yet he chose to be no one. Why? She needed clarity. So she walked the high street, hands in her coat pockets, trying to find something, anything that would make sense. It wasn't until she passed the hardware shop that she heard it. Her name spoken quietly. "Grace." It was Mr. Jennings, an older rancher from the next valley over. He held a copy of the Silver County Herald in his hand, the headline in bold, "2 more families sell under pressure, Easton Development expands." She grabbed the paper, reading quickly. Ray Easton, her ex, was sweeping through the valley, buying land fast and quiet. Grace's stomach turned. The article described it all. Legal strong-arming, pressuring families into selling, burying them in debt. Then one line caught her breath. Easton Development expects to break ground within 3 months on the southern edge of Silvertree, her land. Suddenly, everything clicked. The break-ins, the map, the threats. This wasn't just about her. Ray was choking the life out of the entire valley, one deed at a time. And she had walked away from the one man who might have stopped him. That night, she barely slept. The motel room felt tighter with every hour, like the walls were closing in. She tried to tell herself she had made the right decision, that Jackson, or Jack, had kept too many secrets. But the memories kept flooding back. The way he moved through her ranch with reverence, the way he calmed Dusty with a single touch, the way he fought for her without hesitation. He hadn't lied to protect himself. He'd hidden his past because he didn't want it to define him anymore. And now Ray was gaining ground. At dawn, Grace didn't hesitate. She packed her things, started the truck, and headed back to Silvertree. The moment she passed the weathered ranch sign, something inside her loosened. She found Jack in the barn, brushing down Dusty, sleeves rolled up like nothing had happened. He looked up as she approached, and in his eyes she saw it. No anger, no accusation, only quiet waiting. "I read the news," she said. "I know. He's moving faster than we thought." Jack nodded. "He always planned to. You just couldn't see it until now." She stepped closer. "I walked away." "I know that too. I didn't come back for an apology or an explanation." "Then why?" Grace swallowed. "Because I need you." Not just the man with a wrench and a soft voice. I need Jackson Langford, the man who built half the state, the man who can stop Ray before he burns everything to the ground. His eyes softened. Are you sure? I'm not sure of anything, she said, voice trembling. Except that you never stopped fighting, even when no one was looking. Jack stood slowly, dusted off his jeans. And I never stopped wanting to protect this place, or you. She blinked back tears. So what do we do now? He walked to a small workbench, picked up a legal folder. The front read Easton Holdings LLC in bold black ink. Now, he said, we make a plan, and then we make it loud. They walked out of the barn together into the early light. The valley may have belonged to Ray on paper, but now Grace and Jack had purpose, and that was something money couldn't buy. 3 days after Grace returned to Silver Tree Ranch and made the quiet, determined choice to stand beside Jack, Jackson Langford, they stood in front of the old town hall, ready to face the fight of their lives. Word had traveled quickly, and the meeting room was packed with ranchers, farmers, teachers, and small business owners, people who had all felt the pressure of Ray Easton's quiet takeover of the valley. Some looked curious, some were wary, but most looked tired. Tired of threats, tired of silence, tired of feeling like their lives were being bought out from under them. Jackson stood at the front, sleeves rolled, collar open, no tie in sight. Gone was the oil tycoon persona, the man in the tailored suits and private jets. In his place stood someone simpler but no less powerful, a man grounded by land, grief, and newfound purpose. Grace stood beside him, eyes scanning the crowd, heart pounding in her chest. Every beat seemed to echo. This matters. This is how we fight back. Behind them, an easel held maps, documents, a paper trail that traced Easton Development's shadowy path. Shell companies, coercive offers, and a pattern of buying silence. Jackson didn't speak like a businessman that morning. He spoke like a neighbor. A man who had seen what unchecked power could do and refused to watch it happen again. I know I haven't given you many reasons to trust me, Jackson began, his voice low but steady. I left this valley once, walked away from it all when I should have stayed and fought, but I've seen Ray's tactics before. I've seen men like him squeeze communities until there's nothing left but regret. I can't change the past, but I can help change what comes next. He held up a file. These are injunctions, legal filings that can stop Ray's project in its tracks, at least long enough to give us time. I'll pay the fees. All I ask is that you stand with me. For a long, tense moment, no one moved. Then from the back, an elderly woman in a sun-faded cardigan raised her hand. Are you really Jackson Langford? I am, he said quietly. And I'm not proud of everything I've done, but I am proud to stand here now. One by one, the mood shifted. Heads nodded. Murmurs of approval rose. Farmers who hadn't spoken to each other in months stepped forward. By the end of the hour, 25 signatures sat on the table, enough to stall Easton's project. But Jackson knew the paperwork was only the beginning. That night, he paced the barn with a phone pressed to his ear, speaking in hushed tones with a contact from his former legal team. Grace leaned against the doorway, arms folded, listening. When he hung up, she asked, You think Ray will show? He has to, Jackson replied. We just hit him where it hurts, his timeline, his control. He won't walk away quietly. And he was right. Just past midnight, the low rumble of engines cut through the dark. Grace and Jackson exchanged a glance. It had begun. 3 black trucks pulled into the pasture, headlights off until they were too close to avoid. Shadows spilled out. Half a dozen men with flashlights, chains, and bad intentions. Ray's voice cut through the night like ice. Come out, Langford, let's finish this. Jackson stepped forward from the shadows, shotgun lowered but loaded. You made your move. Now leave. Ray smirked, cocky and cruel. You think paperwork's going to stop me? No, Jackson said, but witnesses will. Sirens howled in the distance, flashing blue and red against the hills. Ray's smirk faltered. You called the cops? Jackson nodded toward the shadows behind Ray. No, she did. Grace stepped out, rifle raised, eyes cold and unwavering. Back away, Ray. He lunged. A single gunshot cracked the silence. Ray dropped, clutching his side. His men scattered into the night like rats. Jackson ran to Grace, blood trailing from a gash on his temple, but steady on his feet. You all right? She asked, breathless. Close enough, he replied. By dawn, Ray was in cuffs, arrested for trespassing, unregistered weapons, and attempted assault. His men were tracked down before breakfast. And though the legal fight was far from over, the worst of it, the part that required courage, unity, and standing your ground, was behind them. For the first time in months, Grace breathed deeply, not because it was over, but because she knew she wasn't fighting alone anymore. And for Jackson, standing there in the light of morning, it wasn't just about defeating Ray. It was about redemption, about finally becoming the man Grace believed he could be. Sometimes the greatest battles we fight aren't the ones with fists or legal documents. They're the ones within ourselves. For years, Jackson Langford ran from his past. He had built empires, lost love, and vanished behind the quiet of a cowboy's life, hoping anonymity would bring him peace. But peace doesn't come from hiding. It comes from choosing to face the pain, the regrets, the broken pieces, and daring to build something better with what's left. When Grace uncovered his truth, it shattered the fragile trust between them. But it also forced a reckoning, not just for Jackson, but for Grace too, because trust, once broken, demands more than words. It demands courage, the courage to return, to stand together, and to forgive not only others but yourself. Their story reminds us that real love isn't about perfect honesty from the start. It's about what you choose when the truth finally comes out. Do you run, or do you stay and fight for the future you both deserve? Grace could have stayed gone. Jackson could have kept retreating into silence, but they didn't. They chose each other despite the mess, despite the history, and in doing so, they protected more than just a ranch. They protected hope. So here's the lesson. No matter what you've been through, no matter how far you think you've fallen, it's never too late to turn around and fight for the life and the love that still waits for you. Healing isn't always loud. Sometimes it comes quietly in the way someone stands beside you, even when you're unsure you deserve it. If this story stirred something in you, if it made you think of second chances or someone you once walked away from, share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear how you fought your own battles or found light after loss. And if you believe in love that rebuilds, in redemption that runs deep, please subscribe to Soul Stirring Stories. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss another journey of hope, healing, and heart. Because you never know, the next story might just remind you that you too are worthy of starting again.